Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to give a list of some adult fantasy works with no romance. So this is kind of part of an ongoing series I've been doing that goes through different amounts of romance that you see in fantasy works. Because fantasy romance is becoming so prevalent, but oftentimes you don't see it separated from fantasy, you see them grouped together, and I think it's great that fantasy romance has become so much more of a thing because I think it has provided a kind of story that a lot of people were looking for. It's also a great stepping stone into fantasy if that's where you eventually find yourself, and sometimes it's a fun way for fantasy readers to get into romance. But I do think there are a lot of people that are not necessarily looking for fantasy romance, yet they can't always differentiate the two. So I did do a video where I give some adult fantasy romance recommendations that are not the super popular ones like Sarah J. Maas and Jennifer L. Armentrout. I did a video where I talk about adult fantasy that has great romantic subplots, great character relationship building, but that never takes over the plot because I think a lot of us actually like seeing that in our fantasy. And then today's is no romance. And I do want to clarify that that doesn't mean that there aren't characters that maybe are married, or if it's a political fantasy, it's understood that there might be a character that is looking for some kind of alliance that is going to be through a marriage, but to me that's not the same thing as a fantasy romance. That's true of a couple of these on the list, but I'm going to start with one that literally there's no I'm trying to establish my reign by marrying this person. There's no really like pining or anything like that. In fact, the whole book is basically two people want to kill each other. That's the setup, and that would be Vicious by V.E. Schwab. So if you don't know, Vicious is told through a fractured timeline, which I think makes for a really interesting experience. And if you've never heard that term before, it does not necessarily mean we're just looking at flashbacks. It means we are looking at all different times, and it would seem like that would be disorienting, going from 10 minutes until a certain event, and then 3 years before, 15 years before, 5 minutes until 3 months ago. You're swapping between so many different time periods of these people's lives that you would think you're not going to get a good story within there, but it's done really well, and it feels so kind of like the author trusts you to follow through and piece together what you think is going to happen. It's like having puzzle pieces so that you eventually put them all together and you get the full picture. And like I said, it's pretty much about these two men that want to kill each other, but you gather from the previous times that they used to be best friends, and now their main desire is to kill each other, and you're not sure what happened. And the other side of this, it has an X-Men feeling to it to some degree because it is a phenomenon. It's believed, it's kind of a conspiracy theory, that if your heart stops beating and then comes back, that you may gain some kind of power. And basically, if you die, that's the idea. If you die and then come back to life very quickly, that you are going to have some kind of power, and that power is going to be associated in some way with how you died. So I think that setup is really interesting. I like the mystery throughout where you're wondering, is that actually true? And if it is true, do the characters understand it correctly, or is there more to the story? And it is by V.E. Schwab, so I think it has her kind of sinister V.E. Schwab flair that you're going to get in a lot of her works. After that, we have an epic fantasy recommendation, and that would be Shadow of the Gods. So this is one where you do have a character that is married. Again, I don't think that in any way that would be categorized as fantasy romance or even really a romantic subplot. It's just like they're married, they're a unit. But that's basically it. And you follow three main perspectives in the first one. In the sequel, Hunger of the Gods, the perspectives open up and you actually get some villainous character perspectives, which I thought added some flavor and variety to the story, so I liked that. But in the first one, you have three characters. One is the married character who eventually sets out kind of on a revenge plot to some degree. You have another character who it seems is already on a revenge quest, and then you have a character who you're like, what is your deal? You just kind of seem almost like a Viking. And you kind of piece together what's going on with them, where they came from, who they're connected to, and it's fun to see the way these characters' lives somewhat intertwine. And I will say the sequel, the villainous characters provide a new perspective, not in just literally you're getting more perspectives in the story, but also you start to see things in a different way. One character is just the worst, so you don't really see anything interesting through them. But another character is one where you're like, I kind of understand your actions. It's just you're in opposition to the main crew, and I like the main crew, so I don't know how I feel about this. And I like that moral conundrum within my epic fantasy. It is also Norse inspired, so if you're somebody who's a huge fan of that kind of thing, you're probably going to see a lot of nods that you will appreciate, but the world is definitely very unique. It's not like a retelling or anything like that. Speaking of retellings, the next one would be Kaikeyi. So you do see that a big part of the plot is this young woman likely going to be married off. So once again, that does not, in my opinion, count as fantasy romance. In fact, it's almost in a lot of ways the opposite, unless that's the whole point of like, are these two who are going to have this arranged marriage, like, are they actually going to fall in love? It's not like that though, at all. It's more of just a very reflective, kind of slower, introspective story that follows this young woman who has this magic and this sort of connection with a being, it would seem, the ability to kind of see threads that allow her to understand certain connections between characters and herself and these other people. And as she is growing up, you're seeing the way that sort of some tragedies unfold. You're seeing the way that she matures, how she recognizes her place within society, her beliefs, and how certain things that she wants for her people, for herself, can sometimes conflict with tradition, can sometimes conflict with faith, even though she is a faithful person herself. And so you're seeing her question a lot, and you're seeing her want to do what she feels is best for her people, and also how is she going to use the power she does have and the privilege she does have to help others. Especially, she gains a lot of insight into the injustices of the world through her own life, and rather than kind of feel bad for herself, which would be completely justified, she often tries to turn things around and then make her a more empathetic person. I really liked her as a main character. I thought she was flawed, but I thought she was extremely likable. I really rooted for her. I found her inspirational. I just think that this is a great book in general, but it also explores a lot of fantastic relationships. Her and you see her brother. She has multiple brothers, but one of the relationships is a little bit closer. Her relationship with her father, her questioning what happened with her mother, and then certain people that serve her, people that she eventually gets to know. I don't want to say too much about what transpires in her adult life, because I think part of what makes this story so engaging is kind of seeing how everything unfolds, but just other relationships with other people and how they develop later. It's really good. I really enjoy this one. Highly recommend, especially if you like retellings that you don't see often, because I think so many of us are so accustomed to the Norse and the Greek that it's kind of nice to see something based in something different than that. After that, we have combat codes. This one follows two main perspectives. One would be Murray and one would be Seago. Seago is a young boy who has essentially been enslaved. He is living a very difficult life where he is forced to train constantly, and then basically fight other children for the entertainment of other people. There are these fighting pits, and if he gains attention, he can basically almost get a sponsor, somebody who's willing to take him and potentially have him go to this prestigious school that would teach him how to become a fighter. And you see Murray as somebody who has gone through a lot of training himself. He kind of had a very rigorous, difficult time becoming this warrior-like being, and he sees something in Seago that sort of, he has that, like, I'm older, been there, done that sort of a character, and then is inspired by this young boy that he encounters, and he wants to kind of make a difference now as a result of being inspired by this boy. So you see these two characters come together. You also get a lot of flashbacks that I think the way those play out in the story and how they're intertwined with the present day plotline creates for some interesting reveals and twists and turns, and you are trying to puzzle out what happened to Seago, and also why does Murray seem like he has such an unfavorable view toward their society. So you're kind of trying to piece all of that together. It's it's got some interesting twists and turns. After that, we have The Art of Prophecy, another good mentor-mentee relationship if you are a fan of that. So The Art of Prophecy follows, as you would expect, there is a prophecy that says there will be this chosen one who will defeat this enemy. And the problem is that everybody's so worried about, like, we have to make sure that the chosen one, that nothing bad ever happens to them. Otherwise, we won't have anybody to save us. So they pamper him to the extreme. So he is wholly unprepared for whatever threats might befall them. And Taisha, the mentor type character, she sees him fighting one day, which is basically just everybody letting him win. And as somebody who is an incredible warrior, this is almost like an offense to her. And she sees this and she's like, no, this is not our chosen one, at least not now. And so she takes it upon herself to train him, make him actually good at fighting and somebody who could potentially defeat some kind of ultimate evil enemy that might come their way. But it takes that typical mentor-mentee relationship and the chosen one tropes that you see in fantasy so often, and it really flips them on their head and it goes in a direction you don't really expect. And then you're kind of like, well, now what? And I really liked that about this story. It does have a lot of silliness and campiness to it. I've described it before as like feeling like you're watching a Jackie Chan movie in a lot of ways. So it does have quite a bit of that mixed in. And when it first started, it took a little bit of getting used to for me because I'm a little picky when it comes to that mixed in to my stories. But I think it definitely did it in a way that I thought was very well balanced. After that, we have the book Ruination. So this is part of the League of Legends world. If you're a fan of the show Arcane, you're not going to see any of the same characters, but it is, I still think, really interesting. I think the thing that made a lot of us fall in love with Arcane was just all the interesting plot lines and all the fantastic characters and the way everything came together. And I think that's true of Ruination as well. It's, I think, a great balance between plot and characters. The setup is that you follow this woman, and she is this general. She's very powerful, and her relative has ascended to the throne. However, he's not really prepared to be a ruler. He doesn't have what it takes. He's not as strong as the previous ruler, and a lot of people doubt his abilities. So Callista is her name. She decides, you know what, Viego, I'm going to stand by him. I'm going to make sure that he has everything he needs to be a good ruler. And so she's doing everything she can. And then also Viego's wife is very intelligent. She's very pragmatic. She advises him really well, but then something happens to her that now sends Callista on this mission to try to find a way to heal Isolde, is the wife's name. So you're following Callista as she is on this mission, as she's embarking on what seems like an impossible quest, and it becomes very magical and very captivating. I think if you like fantasy stories, that it just feels like you're on this adventure and everything feels magical and interesting and mysterious, and you kind of like that idea of there's this part of the map that nobody really ever gets to, or there's this place that we don't actually know if it's real. If you like that in your fantasy, that's kind of Ruination in a nutshell. And then last for today, we have one of my favorite political fantasies. It's very kind of slower going, but I think totally worth it. And that would be the Goblin Emperor. Maya is the best. I love Maya so much. He's our main character of the story. He is half goblin and then half elven, because in this land that he is living in, the elves are actually the main race, and his father is somebody who wed a goblin woman. He more so did this to gain an alliance with the goblin kingdom, you could say, but he has a lot of prejudice against them, and so after making the marriage official, we'll say, he didn't really want anything to do with his wife after that particular wife, because he's been married several times. But it would seem just within that one short amount of time, she did end up having a child, and that is who Maya is. And he's grown up, cast out of society, looked down upon, but he's not really living among the people. His father still at least has some people to tend to him. He has an advisor, you could say. And this man does not treat Maya well. So Maya's never really lived a very good life. He's felt so isolated and separated from everyone. And then there is an accident that occurs, and everyone in line for the throne before Maya dies. And so suddenly he finds himself the Emperor. He's facing a lot of people who look down upon him for being half goblin. He's also never really been prepared for this role, but he really decides that he's going to give it his all. It's the kind of story that the fantasy names are really intense. There's so many different characters that are introduced, but for me it really worked because I think it did a good job of capturing what it would actually be like to be that unprepared and thrown into this situation, and you're just trying to be like, who's that again? What do they want? I think this person seems suspicious. Okay, apparently this is going against protocol, but this seems best for the people, but if I make this decision, it's going to upset these people, and these people are the ones that are giving us money. And so he has all these decisions he has to make. And through it all, it's like his pureness of heart. You're like rooting for that to stay pure. It's the opposite, I feel like, of a lot of fantasy nowadays, where you're kind of like, I like the morally gray characters. Maya is just such a sweetheart, and you're like, oh, never change, but also change the kingdom for the better with your pureness. That's how you feel while you're reading it. But it is super intense with all of the fantasy elements. So if you're somebody who wants kind of like a slower, day-to-day, almost minute-to-minute political fantasy, Goblin Emperor is fantastic. That's it, though, for some adult fantasy book recs that have basically no romance. Definitely let me know your recommendations, and then if you're interested in those other videos, I'll have them linked, and you can give your recommendations for those in those videos as well. If you're interested in any of these, I'll have them linked in the description bar, but anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.